Hi, I'm Jamie Miller, Registered SQF Consultant at Kellerman Consulting, and you're watching the Risk Assessment video series. Kellerman Consulting releases weekly training videos and important tips and strategies to help companies keep up to date with the latest food safety regulations. In this episode, we will look at the role leadership plays in development and implementation of documented risk assessments, as well as the follow-up actions to make sure those risk assessments remain useful for the facility. We will be building on the concepts of how to write a risk assessment discussed in our previous episode, and if you have not had a chance to download the free risk assessment tools on our website, we recommend that you take a moment to do so as you follow along with this episode. We will be talking about the owner, CEOs, or other upper management of food and food packaging companies when we speak about leadership. No matter what your role is in an organization, it is important to understand the importance of having the participation of decision makers in the risk assessment process. In our video series on culture of food safety, we focused on the need for strong leadership in food safety. Employee accountability is a very important aspect of addressing risk, and when we assess and document risk in the facility, knowing that leadership participated in those risk assessments and that leadership is prepared to back those assessments up in daily operations can make a major difference in properly executing controls for risk. The reason why leadership is so important for risk assessments is that just as many people see and handle risk differently in their own lives, employees may see risk differently in the facility, and that difference of opinion can make assessing and managing risk quite difficult. If an employee that is not deemed to be a leader of the organization performs a risk assessment that is rejected by other employees, they may not be taken seriously or may be outright ignored. Similarly, if the employee is not qualified to assess risk or lacks sufficient information for assessing the risk for the business, the risk assessed may be too much or too little, and it may cause the facility to act in ways which are inappropriate for the actual risk. For the downloadable risk assessment templates included with this series, choosing the simple risk assessment or the complex dynamic template is something leadership should have a role in. As an example, if a facility does not have allergens in operation and does not anticipate adding allergens into operations, the simple risk assessment is probably appropriate. But if allergens may be added to the operations for new projects, the dynamic risk assessment may be more useful. It is important to involve leadership of the organization in these risk assessments, as they are going to have a significantly better vantage point on whether allergens might be introduced. Going along with choosing the proper risk assessment format, assuring that the risk assessments are accepted by personnel in the facility, requires that assessments come not just from quality assurance or the food safety team, but also from upper management. Remember that part of risk comes from employee behavior, and where employees do not take the documented risk assessments seriously and the control measures associated with those assessments, the assessments may not have much value in improving operations. Leadership also has a role to play in making sure that risk assessments are created and reviewed according to a schedule. We strongly recommend the scheduling of risk assessment creation and review, as risk assessments are themselves at risk of getting lost or forgotten otherwise. And here, when we talk about scheduling, we are not talking about a specific day of the year, but during a time period such as a specific month or quarter, where the facility has several risk assessments to create or review. Scheduling can break up the process over several meetings to avoid interfering with regular operations. For scheduled risk assessment activities, where possible, a cross-functional team, including leadership, quality personnel, and production leads, will give the team access to pertinent business and operational information that these groups do not possess alone. It can also be great to include sales or support staff in these discussions, as they may have a completely different take or novel idea compared to someone who works closely with the product on a daily basis. Leadership also has a large role to play in making sure risk assessments are up to date as changes to suppliers, equipment, the facility, or personnel within the organization change. Here, changes may be driven by business decisions such as adding a new piece of equipment or a new production line, construction projects that expand or change the facility layout, or change that addresses risk identified in a performed risk assessment. For this last type of change, think of having the roof redone to address the risk of roof leaks. In all of these cases, the previously completed risk assessment needs to be reassessed. And since leadership input is required to initiate these larger projects, making sure to include a review of the risk assessments as part of these activities will assure that the facility has considered whether the risk associated with the assessed activities or areas of the facility has increased or decreased. Another area where leadership involvement in risk assessments can make a huge difference is where assessments are regularly integrated into leadership walkthroughs. If the facility has 2 or 3 areas or practices where risk assessments have been performed and documented, it is fairly simple to remember to check up on those during walkthroughs and see if observed behavior is in line with the expectations set in the risk assessment. Ideally, leadership discussions that include risk assessments occur regularly as part of the management review activities in the facility. Whether these occur as part of the daily or weekly production meetings, regularly scheduled improvement or culture of food safety meetings, or less frequent annual or semi-annual program reviews, leadership should look at, read, and investigate the results of measures taken to control risks as identified in the risk assessments. Where the risk assessments need to be changed or no longer appear to be correct for observed facilities, making sure that those documents are updated and reviewed following those updates should be closely watched by leadership. That is also true for communications and training on those assessments following changes. In our next episode of the Risk Assessment series, we'll discuss where risk assessments are required in the food safety programs and how the safety team review of risk assessments should occur as part of those safety plan activities. To learn more, visit our website and you'll find a full library of food safety training videos and resources. Follow us on LinkedIn and click the bell to be notified of new resources as they are released each week.